Peru's Congress is holding impeachment proceedings against President Martin Vizcarra. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo paid a brief visit to Brazil this Friday before heading to Colombia as part of a South American tour to spark protests. The Director General of the World Health Organization has pointed to the lack of global solidarity in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Peru, where Congress opened impeachment proceedings against President Martin Vizcarra this Friday, following allegations of misuse of funds and influence peddling. 130 lawmakers are set to decide whether to impeach Vizcarra, following the corruption allegations stemming from the leaking of audio tapes connecting him with what has become known as the swing case. The current political controversy was sparked by revelations showing contracts signed between the Peruvian Ministry of Culture and little-known singer Richard Cisneros, known as Richard Swing. Meanwhile, the audio tapes revealed instructions by President Vizcarra to his aides to lie to investigators regarding Cisneros' visits to the government headquarters in the capital, Lima, shortly after the president had denied any relationship or contact with the artist. And speaking before the Congress this Friday, President
I recognize that it is my voice that is in one of the audios. I have already said it publicly. What I will not recognize or accept in no way are the accusations leveled against me and the biased way in which the information is being presented. I ask, what is the crime? With this, I do not mean that I should not be investigated. On the contrary, I am the first person interested in analyzing all the details, in contrast to the versions of events.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, speaking during the United Nations event SDG Moment of the Decade of Action this Friday, stressed the determination of the Venezuelan people in the face of economic sanctions and coercive measures imposed by the United States government.
An heroic deed of an entire country that, in spite of the difficulties and aggressions, is today on the offensive to fulfill the 2030 agenda.
Appeal will hear the claim of the Venezuelan government against the Bank of England next week for refusing to hand over Venezuelan gold reserves. According to a press release by London law firm Sawaya & Co., representing the Central Bank of Venezuela, the appeal hearing will take place between September 22nd and 24th in the UK capital. On July 2nd, London's High Court ruled against the Venezuelan bank in the lawsuit against the Bank of England, determining that the gold valued at over $1.2 billion must be delivered to the board appointed by the Venezuela as prefabricated plagiarism. The alleged independent commission never visited Venezuela, nor did it meet with authorities or opposition leaders, the minister explained during a virtual forum. The head of Venezuelan diplomacy pointed out that the so-called fact-finding mission is a result of a Human Rights Council resolution passed by only 10% of members, as most abstained, with the exception of those making up the so-called Lima Group and some European nations aligned against Venezuela. Ariasa noted the achievements made in the coordinated cooperation between the Bolivarian government and the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And the Venezuelan government has denounced the use of the issue of human rights as a means to question the upcoming parliamentary elections, revealing foreign interests that have nothing to do with promoting democracy in the country. Our correspondent Leonora Tamal has the story.
This week, a human rights report sponsored by the Lima Group was published. The organization of right-wing government slanderers of the Venezuelan revolution promoted this report, which is being called a ghost document, filled with inaccuracies and mistakes. Caracas rejected this report while validating its joint work with the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, with whom it collaborates regularly.
This document lacks of credibility, and it is an act of propaganda against our country, and we will respond to it with the law, with justice. In Venezuela, whoever violates human rights will be condemned, punished, and the public ministry has proved it will do so. There are people condemned, investigated, prosecuted.
Analysts think that this report is written and published within the framework of the political and economic pressure plan against Venezuela, aiming at the December parliamentary elections through a strategy of international coercion.
The problem of this report is that it seems more than clear the purpose of using it as a legal excuse under the United Nations jurisdiction to initiate criminal actions against the Venezuelan leadership. It is not the first attempt. Its credibility is questionable.
The facts show that this report will be used as a trigger to strengthen the strategy of the United States and the OAS, which is seeking to sabotage the parliamentary elections due to the failure of the opposition sectors that gather around Guaido. That's how the purpose is crystal clear. The U.S. interests are actively working to discredit the poll in December.
More and more countries know the fragility of the elections of the National Assembly, scheduled by Maduro for December 6th of this year, will be no fair nor free.
Sectors of the opposition and Chavismo called the European Union to accompany the process. However, the bloc insists that Venezuela change its legal instances.
Strong support from ICG Minister to continue working for a negotiated political solution for Venezuela crisis. The celebration of free and fair election is key. Only mere change to the conditions and the schedule could allow the deployment of an EU electoral observation mission.
As in other occasions of Pulseo International, a bloc that supports the self-determination of Venezuela with China, Russia and other allied governments is configured.
These elections must be respected and supported by the international community. The government of China always supports and will continue to support the efforts of the government and the opposition of Venezuela to resolve the difference through dialogues and consultations.
The maximum pressure strategy announced by the United States includes various destabilization formulations and is preceded by the November U.S. presidential election.
This period before the elections is a very dangerous time when we can expect political pressures, economic pressures, increased psychological warfare, and also military operations, all regular and irregular, against the Bolivarian revolution.
Internally, the different political sectors already registered with the National Electoral Council have said that the elections will be held inevitably on next December 6. Leonel Retamal Muñoz, TeleSUR, Caracas, Venezuela.
Colombia's Institute for Development and Peace Studies confirmed a new massacre in the north of the country this Friday, in which 3 people were killed by armed groups. The killings occurred in Ocaña municipality in North Santander department, and the victims were found dead in the rural area of Aguas Claras. The 3 young victims did not live in the area. They were drinking in a public establishment when the armed men arrived and shot them. The perpetrators and their motives are not yet known. There remains great silence surrounding the systematic murder of Colombia's social leaders, environmental and human rights defenders, or demobilized guerrillas. The Colombian National Health Institute registered more than 7,500 new COVID-19 cases on Thursday, taking the total number of infections to almost 744,000. The National Health Institute also confirmed nearly 190 new deaths, taking the country's death toll to more than 23,600. Health authorities also report over 600,000 recovered patients and more than 100,000 active patients. More than 24,000 PCR tests were performed in the last 24 hours. Health specialists have reiterated the call to the population to maintain biosecurity measures to stop the spread of the virus. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo paid a brief visit to Brazil, close to the border of Venezuela, this Friday, before heading to Colombia as part of a South American tour that has sparked protests. The tour marks the first time that a U.S. Secretary of State has visited Suriname and Guyana, where U.S. oil interests are at play. The tour has been questioned, given that Pompeo will visit 3 countries bordering Venezuela with a push to increase pressure on the government of Nicolas Maduro, likely to be the major focus of the agenda, as well as showing up other U.S. economic and geopolitical interests. The governments of both Colombia and Brazil have long worked in line with Washington's hostile policy towards Caracas, and the visit to neighbouring Guyana was expected to seek to gain the support of its newly elected government for these moves. And in Trinidad and Tobago, the Movement for Social Justice Party has questioned the reasons and timing of U.S. Secretary of State's official visit to Guyana this week. Party leader David Abdullah expressed his concern about Pompeo's visit to Guyana and the geopolitical interests of the United States towards Venezuela. He pointed out that if Guyana's newly elected government gives in, it would go against Guyana's respect for the sovereignty of the neighbouring nation and non-interference in its internal affairs. Abdullah recalled that Guyana was one of the 2 Caribbean states to openly support the recently elected president of the Inter-American Development Bank, Mauricio Claver-Carón, advisor to U.S. President Donald Trump on Latin America, and his proposal for the post.
On the occasion of the World Day of Social Justice,
And as mentioned, this Friday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo made a very brief visit to the Brazilian city of Boa Vista, near the border of Venezuela, where he met with Venezuelan immigrants and spoke against the democratically elected government of Nicolas Maduro. Our correspondent Brian Meir brings us the details on the visit and its motives.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo made a very brief visit to Brazil today, stopping in the Amazonian city of Boa Vista, near the Venezuelan border, for around 3.5 hours. During his visit, he met with Brazilian military officials and held photo ops with so-called Venezuelan refugees. And he made more threats and upped the rhetoric against the democratically elected government of Nicolas Maduro. Now, here in Brazil, most people believe that this event had a lot more to do with the U.S. presidential elections than anything concerning Brazil or the Brazilian people. As one university professor noted, Florida is the biggest state left in the United States that Trump still has a chance of winning. It has a large right-wing expat population of Venezuelans. So the move was probably more geared towards them, towards those voters, than anyone in Brazil. Nevertheless, the Brazilian Committee for Peace in Venezuela was quick to issue a statement of repudiation against the visit by Mike Pompeo. In it, they said that this complicity and subservience to the United States government does not have the interests of the Brazilian people in mind, and it threatens to drag the Brazilian people into an armed conflict that would do nothing but cause suffering for both Brazilians and their neighbors in Venezuela.
Thank you, Brian. Moving on to other news, this Friday, the president of Spain's Community of Madrid announced new restrictions in the face of a surge in COVID-19 cases, urging residents not to travel out of their neighbourhoods unless they need to work or study.
There are 37 areas throughout the Community of Madrid where the incidence is much higher. In fact, we are talking about 1,000 infections per 100,000 inhabitants, a very serious figure, and therefore we are obliged to take a series of measures on these specific areas to contain its spread. The state of alarm must be avoided at all costs. Above all, the confinement must be removed. An economic disaster must be avoided. Confinement and the state of alarm is the economic disaster, and we have to avoid it by all means.
And this Friday, the Autonomous Community of Madrid reported more than 5,100 new coronavirus cases. Madrid has a rate of transmission 6 times higher than the national average, which already leads European nations. According to the Spanish Health Ministry's official data, the country has confirmed more than 654,000 COVID-19 cases and over 30,400 deaths. Hurricane-force winds and heavy rain battered several islands off the western coast of Greece, causing power outages and road closures this Friday, as authorities in nearby mainland areas remained on alert. A powerful tropical-like storm named Aianos was expected to reach the Greek mainland and parts of the southern region later this Friday. The Civil Protection Authority said the western islands of Zakynthos, Kefalonia and Ikathi have been the most affected by the storm. Schools are closed in many areas in western Greece, and authorities advised residents to remain indoors. On Friday, Tropical Storm Noel made landfall in Vietnam, killing 1 person and injuring dozens more as it unleashed heavy rains and high winds across the country's central coastal region. Noel is the biggest storm of the year. According to Vietnamese forecasters, the storm was downgraded to a tropical depression late Friday. All airports in central Vietnam remain closed, while a ban on fishing vessels has been in place since Thursday. South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kwon-hwa held a meeting with her Vietnamese counterpart, Pham Binh Nguyen, on Friday to discuss bilateral cooperation. Kang's 2-day visit to Hanoi is being seen as an opportunity for the ministers to strengthen ties between the two Asian partners. South Korea is Vietnam's largest foreign investor and is also among the few countries with which Vietnam is resuming commercial flights after being grounded for months due to COVID-19. Welcome back to From the South. The Director General of the World Health Organization pointed to the lack of global solidarity in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic this Friday.
One major problem that we see now in the world is lack of global solidarity. The major powers are not working together. So they should, if they are really, if they're going to show real commitment to defeating this pandemic, it's by having a genuine solidarity. That's number one. There has been a recurring pattern of money being thrown at outbreaks when they're already in full flow, but then funds no longer being available to prevent the next outbreak. Reviews and reports are only as good as the recommendations that are implemented. COVID-19 has shown that collectively the world was woefully underprepared. But with humility and togetherness, we can plan for the long term and invest in health and preparedness. This isn't charity. It's an investment in our collective future.
The Executive Director of the W.H.O World Health Emergencies Programme, Michael Ryan, has warned that the coronavirus pandemic is not going away as countries across the world experience spikes in new cases.
Referring to is that overall plateauing of globally reported cases over the last number of weeks, and we're adding about 1.8 to 2 million cases per week to the global case count, and an average somewhere between 40 and 50,000 deaths, and thankfully that is not rising exponentially, but that is a hugely high figure to be settling at. That is not where we want to be. It's not where the Northern Hemisphere wants to be going into the winter season. It's not where developing countries want to be with their health services under 9 months of pressure. Nobody wants to be in this situation because the energy has not gone out of this pandemic.
Expressing their support for the Palestinian cause, hundreds of people gathered in Morocco's capital, Rabat, on Friday to protest the United States brokered peace deals between Israel, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain.
This event, organized by Moroccan coalitions in support of the Palestinian people, is there to affirm the position of the Moroccan people on all the agreements of betrayal and normalization that the Emirates and Bahrain have concluded. From this place, in front of the Moroccan Parliament, we send a letter of support to the Palestinian people, a letter of attachment to the freedom of Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem. And the most shouted slogan I have heard today is, Moroccans will never forget Al-Aqsa and Jerusalem. We are here to remind the Moroccan state and the whole world that we consider that the Palestinian cause is also ours, and we have made sacrifices, and Moroccans have given their lives for the Palestinian cause.
9,000 refugees have been affected by severe flooding in Niger since July this year. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, many people have lost everything and are now living in difficult conditions without food, water, shelter, hygiene and sanitation. They're at risk of diseases like COVID-19, malaria and cholera. The multilateral agency says it's doing what is possible to help, providing emergency assistance, but stressed that much more is needed and the situation is likely to worsen.
We don't have a place to sleep. We don't have access to sanitation and toilets. Our children don't have a good life. Our children are living in classrooms now. We are in a difficult situation. We need help. We have been in this situation for a long time. We need food, money, shelter. As refugees, we have lost hope.
Israel began a second full lockdown on Friday to try to contain a fresh outbreak of coronavirus cases. The decision comes as the country's government has been plagued by protests against its mismanagement of the situation. The 3-week lockdown will require the closure of many businesses and set strict limits on movement and public gatherings. Official figures on Friday showed more than 46,000 active cases, with at least 577 patients hospitalized in a serious condition. To date, Israel has reported nearly 180,000 COVID-19 cases and 1,200 deaths. We've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Nicolas, and thank you for watching.